On the darkest winter night, an old abandoned church rested at the heart of a small village. Its walls, worn by time, stood as witnesses to years of glory and faith, now overshadowed by decay and silence. The partially collapsed roof allowed the cold moonlight to filter through, melancholically illuminating the cracked wooden pews. The wind blowing through the broken windows seemed to whisper stories of a forgotten past, while the dust danced in the silver light. The atmosphere was one of complete desolation, as if hope itself had been buried there. This church, once the vibrant center of a faith-filled community, had been abandoned years ago. A natural disaster ravaged the village, leaving deep physical and emotional scars on its inhabitants. The violent storm not only destroyed properties, but also shook the collective spirit of the village. Many lost family members, and others faced the harsh reality of starting over from scratch. The church, which should have been a refuge of comfort, became a grim reminder of the tragedy, driving the villagers away from it and their faith. Now, on Christmas Eve, the village faced a new kind of darkness. Poverty and despair had become part of daily life. The streets, once decorated with festive lights, were empty, showing no signs of past celebrations. Families stayed in their homes, sheltered from the cold, but also from a hope that seemed distant. The sound of the church bell, which used to echo as a call to faith and communion, had not been heard in years. Yet something strange lingered in the air that night. An indefinable feeling, a sort of silent unrest. Despite the outward silence, there was an inexplicable expectation that caused the villagers to look at the starry sky with a mix of longing and anxiety. It was as if the universe was whispering that something extraordinary was about to happen. Among the villagers, there were those who still held in their hearts the memory of the services and Christmas carols that once filled the church during better times. For them, Christmas was not just a date, but a symbol of rebirth and hope. However, these feelings were buried under layers of despair, and few believed they could be reclaimed. The Christmas spirit seemed like a distant memory, lost like the sound of the bell that once united everyone. In homes lit only by the fire in their hearths, the elders told stories to the children about the church's past glory. They spoke of the altar adorned with candles that never seemed to go out, and the choir of voices that made everyone's hearts vibrate. These stories, though captivating, were received by the children as tales of a world that no longer existed. The magic of Christmas felt as unattainable as the warmth of the sun in the heart of winter. Meanwhile, the church remained lonely and silent, a shadow of what it once was. No one dared to enter, but everyone knew it was there, witnessing the passage of time and the transformation of the village. Many believed it was doomed to disappear, just like the dreams it once nurtured, yet on this particular night, fate seemed ready to intervene. The cold wind carried with it the distant sound of footsteps. A man, seemingly driven by an unknown force, approached the church. He didn't know exactly why he was there, but something in his heart pushed him forward. Upon arriving, he stopped for a moment, looking into the dark interior through the broken windows. A feeling of nostalgia and sadness washed over him, but also a spark of hope he couldn't explain. From the other side of the village, others began to feel the same inexplicable call. It was as if an invisible force was guiding their steps. Women, men, children, all were enveloped by a sensation that made them look toward the church, even without understanding why. It was as if something was about to be revealed, something that could change everything. As the clock struck midnight, the starry sky seemed to shine brighter. An unusual stillness took over the village, and even the wind paused for a moment. It was then that the first miracle happened, something no one could have imagined, a sign that even in the deepest darkness, light always finds a way to shine. In the heart of the ancient abandoned church, something extraordinary occurred. Beneath the altar, covered in dust and marks of time, There was a single candle, forgotten and unremarkable, seemingly incapable of fulfilling its purpose. For years, it had been there, untouched but lifeless. Yet precisely at midnight, an unexpected spark of light pierced the darkness, illuminating the space with a glow that defied all logic. The candle, without anyone touching it, ignited on its own, as though a divine breath had awakened its dormant flame. The gentle warmth of the flame began to spread, casting a radiant glow over the once cold and somber environment. The light danced across the worn walls, reviving the faded colors of the ancient, now broken stained glass windows. It was as if the church, for a brief moment, was returning to life, vibrating with an energy long forgotten. The absolute silence was broken by the subtle sound of the wind passing by the flame, a whisper that seemed to carry a message of hope. Outside, the first to notice the phenomenon was the man who had been inexplicably drawn to the church that night, his eyes fixed on the glow of the flame escaping through the broken windows, creating golden reflections on the surrounding snow. He stopped in disbelief, rubbing his eyes to ensure he wasn't imagining things. His heart began to race, and a mixture of awe and reverence overcame him. It felt as though he were in the presence of something sacred, something greater than he could comprehend. Without hesitation, he approached the church door. As he pushed it open, the creaking hinges echoed through the space, yet it failed to disrupt the serenity of the moment. He entered cautiously, his footsteps echoing on the stone floor. As he drew closer to the altar, the candle's light seemed to grow in intensity, bathing him in a radiance that warmed not only his body, but also his soul. Tears streamed down his face, though he didn't fully understand why. It was as if all his doubts and fears were dissolving in the presence of that flame. The man rushed back to the village, unable to contain his excitement. He knocked on every door, telling everyone about what he had witnessed. At first, many regarded him with skepticism, thinking it was merely an illusion or a cold-induced delusion, but there was something in his voice, an unshakable conviction that sparked curiosity in those who heard him. A glimmer of hope began to stir in the hearts of the villagers, even among those who had abandoned all faith. The rumors spread quickly, like wildfire in dry grass. From one house to another, the villagers whispered about what the miracle could mean. Could it be a sign? The elders wondered aloud, while children, their eyes wide with wonder, begged their parents to go to the church. The mere possibility of a miracle was enough to breathe new energy into the village, as if the thought alone could revive weary hearts. Meanwhile, inside the church, the flame continued to burn with serene intensity. It seemed unaffected by the cold wind entering through the broken windows or the adverse conditions of the environment. On the contrary, it appeared to grow in beauty, radiating a warmth that invited all to come closer. The candle became a beacon, not just of physical light, but of an invisible promise that something greater was at work. Among the villagers, debates arose about the meaning of the event. Some believed it was a direct message from God, a call for everyone to reconnect with their faith. Others, more skeptical, saw it as a coincidence or some kind of unexplained natural phenomenon. But regardless of their opinions, no one could deny the impact the candle was having on the community. For the first time in years, people began to talk about hope, about the possibility of good things in the future. Slowly, the entire village began to mobilize. Whole families prepared to leave their homes and walk to the church, braving the biting cold of the night. There was an urgency in the air, a need to see with their own eyes what was happening. Many carried lanterns or unlit candles, as if they wished to capture a bit of that miraculous light for themselves. As they approached the church, the villagers were greeted by a spectacle that left them speechless. The candle's flame seemed more intense than ever, its light escaping through the windows and creating a golden glow that illuminated the surrounding snow. There was something indescribable about the scene, something that caused even the most skeptical to stop in reverence. A respectful silence fell over the group as they slowly approached the entrance. When the first family entered the church, their faces were immediately transformed by the gentle light filling the space. The children ran toward the altar, captivated by the flame, while the adults stood still, watching with tears in their eyes. There was a collective sense that they were witnessing something unique, something that would never be forgotten. The candle's flame was not just a light, it was a living message, a testament that hope can be reborn even in the darkest moments. The footsteps echoed in the snow, a rhythmic sound that united villagers of all ages as they made their way toward the old church. It was a continuous stream of people who, despite the freezing night, felt compelled to be there. Men carried children on their shoulders, while women shielded old lanterns under their coats. Each person carried a story, a unique reason for answering the call of that mysterious light, yet all shared the feeling that something greater awaited them. As they approached the church, the villagers paused for a moment, captivated by the scene before them. The candle's light illuminated the broken stained glass, casting colorful reflections on the snow. For many, it was the first time in years they looked at the church with something other than sadness or indifference. There was an almost magical aura in the air, as if the place were alive again, calling each person by name. It was impossible to ignore the force drawing them inside. As people entered, the once empty and somber space began to transform. Families filled the wooden pews, wiping away the dust with their hands to sit. Some stood near the altar, while others gathered along the sides, their eyes glimmering as they gazed at the flame that still burned with unwavering intensity. The sound of whispers filled the air as the villagers exchanged stories and reflections on what the light might signify. Among the first to enter was an elderly woman who, despite her frail health, insisted on walking to the church. She leaned on a simple cane, but her eyes were filled with determination. Upon seeing the candle, she let out a deep sigh, as though something within her had been healed in that moment. Her words, almost inaudible, echoed through the space. At last, the light has returned. That simple yet powerful phrase touched everyone who heard it, creating an immediate emotional bond among those present. Children, always the first to express their joy, ran closer to the altar, mesmerized by the flame. Some reached out to touch it but were gently stopped by the adults, who feared disturbing the miracle. Even so, the sound of children's laughter filled the space, blending with animated conversations. It was a spontaneous symphony, a celebration of life the church hadn't heard in many years. The walls, once silent witnesses to abandonment, seemed to absorb the sound, reflecting it back with a welcoming vibration. Men and women who had long abandoned their faith found unexpected comfort in that place. Some knelt, feeling the need to pray even if they didn't know the exact words. Others simply closed their eyes, allowing the warmth of the light to envelop them. It was as if everyone had been cleansed by the experience, freed, if only for a moment, from the burdens they carried in their souls. Tears were not uncommon, but they weren't of sadness. They were of profound relief, of a joy beyond words. The church, now full of life, seemed to breathe alongside the villagers. Every movement, every sound, every collective sigh contributed to an atmosphere of reverence and communion. There was no distinction between rich or poor, young or old. All were there as equals, united by a light that transcended their differences. It was as if, for the first time in years, the village had rediscovered what it meant to be a community. Amid the crowd, a young pastor who had abandoned his calling years ago also found himself drawn to the church. He remained silent for a long time, observing the people around him. Finally, with his eyes fixed on the candle, he murmured, "Perhaps it's time to believe again." His words, though quiet, were heard by a few, who nodded in agreement. The message was clear. This light was not merely an isolated miracle, but an invitation for everyone to reconnect with something greater, As more people arrived, the space became so full that some had to remain outside, peering through the broken windows. Despite the cold, no one seemed to mind. They were all there for the same reason, moved by a hope they hadn't felt in years. Many brought unlit candles, which were kindled by the original flame, creating a spectacle of lights that made the scene even more beautiful. The darkness that had once dominated the church was completely dispelled. As the hours passed, the energy inside the church became almost tangible. People who had once been strangers or distant from one another began sharing stories of their lives, their losses, and their hopes. It was as if the light had not only illuminated the physical space, but also opened everyone's hearts. Each word, each gesture contributed to the creation of an environment that was both sacred and profoundly human. The revival of life within the church was more than an event. It was a rediscovery. The candle was a powerful symbol, but the true miracle lay in the unity of the people, in the collective transformation that moment brought. It was a reminder that, even in the darkest times, there is something that can unite us, something that can guide us back to what truly matters. The flame was not just a light, it was a living promise that hope had never entirely disappeared. At the heart of the church, the moment of greatest impact unfolded. The flame, so small and unassuming at first, seemed to have reached a spiritual intensity that touched the soul of every person present. Around the candle, the villagers formed a circle, united by a light that transcended the physical. It was more than a gathering. It was a communion of hearts, a meeting between the divine and the human. The silence that filled the space was heavy, but full of meaning. Each person felt deep within that they were experiencing something sacred. A young woman, who had lost her entire family in the tragedy that devastated the village, stepped forward. In a low but emotional voice, she shared her story. She spoke of years of pain and loneliness, of how Christmas had become a reminder of everything she had lost. But as she looked at the flame, she found something she thought was gone forever. The faith that she could go on. Her words resonated deeply, bringing tears to many. It was as if her vulnerability had opened a portal for collective healing. The pastor, who had remained silent until then, approached the altar. His presence carried symbolic weight. He was a reflection of the internal struggles many there had faced. With a trembling voice, he began to speak about the meaning of light in the darkness. "This candle is a reminder that we are never alone," he said. "Even when everything seems lost, even when pain consumes us, there is a light that never goes out. That light is the presence of God, calling us home, no matter how far we've strayed." Those simple yet profound words reached everyone present. Many nodded, others wept openly. It was as if a wave of spiritual renewal was sweeping through the space, dissolving the barriers that had isolated the villagers from each other and their faith. The candle's flame seemed to reflect this transformation, glowing more brightly, as if alive and aware of what was happening around it. The children, who had been silent until then, began singing a Christmas carol they had learned from their grandparents. Their pure, innocent voices echoed through the church walls, filling the space with a beauty that only music can provide. The adults joined in, their voices hesitant at first, but gaining strength with each verse. Soon, the entire church was vibrating with melody, a testament to unity and hope that seemed to transcend time itself. As the singing continued, an elderly couple lifted a cross that had been left on the altar. It was covered in dust, but under the candlelight it gleamed as though freshly polished. They placed the cross at the center of the circle beside the candle, symbolizing the rebirth of faith within the community. It was a simple yet powerful gesture that brought the villagers even closer together in the purpose of the moment. There was a pause, a profound silence that invited everyone to reflect on their own lives. Many closed their eyes, praying silently, while others simply gazed at the candle as if it held answers to their deepest questions. It was a moment of collective introspection, a reminder that even amidst chaos and pain, there is always the possibility of a new beginning. Then the pastor mentioned something that piqued everyone's curiosity. He spoke about how, during his crisis of faith, he had found comfort in texts and practices that helped him rediscover his connection with God. He mentioned that these resources were available to anyone seeking to deepen their spiritual journey. There are times, he said, when we need clearer guidance, something to help us keep this flame burning in our lives. He cited the ebook Light in the Darkness, Finding Hope at Christmas, as an example of a resource offering reflections, practices, and inspiring messages for those looking to overcome fear, anxiety, and uncertainty. This guide, he explained, is not just a read. It's a practical tool for turning our faith into action, for living with confidence even in challenging times. It could be the light many of you are seeking. His words sparked interest, not as a sales pitch, but as an offer of hope. The circle around the candle grew tighter, as if everyone wanted to absorb as much of the moment as they could. There was a sense of wholeness in the air, as if all the broken pieces were being slowly brought together. The candle, still burning serenely, was more than a physical object. It was a symbol, a reminder that even on the darkest nights, the light will always find a way to shine. When the singing finally ceased, the silence that followed wasn't empty, but brimming with meaning. Each person looked around, recognizing in the faces of others the same flame that burned within their own hearts. The candle's flame had ignited something inside each of them, something that could not be extinguished. It was the climax of the moment, the realization that they were not just rediscovering faith in God, but also in one another. In that instant, the abandoned church ceased to be just a building. It became a living symbol of hope, a beacon to guide the community toward a brighter future. It was the beginning of something new, something that could not be explained in words alone, but could be deeply felt by everyone who was there. As dawn approached, the first families began to leave the church. However, no one departed as they had arrived. The villagers, who once carried expressions of fatigue and despair, now bore faces illuminated with renewed hope. The warmth of the candle's flame seemed to have been transferred into each person's heart, warming their souls amidst the cold of the night. As they walked back to their homes, smiles and words of gratitude were exchanged, creating a new kind of bond within the community. Inside the church, the candle continued to burn, untouched by time or the conditions around it. Its light remained steady, radiating a serenity that transcended human understanding. The last to leave paused for a moment at the door, looking back as if to etch the moment forever in their memories. They knew the candle would continue burning even after the church was empty once again, a symbol of the eternal and constant presence of the divine. As the village fell into the silence of early morning, the message of that night remained vivid in everyone's thoughts. The candle, with its simple light, had conveyed a profound lesson. Even in the densest darkness, there is always a spark of hope. This lesson was not just for those who were present, but for the entire world, a universal reminder that light can always prevail over darkness. Yet the candle's flame was more than a symbol of faith. For many, it also represented the need for action. The light they had found that night could not be forgotten or relegated to the past. It was a call to carry that same hope into their daily lives, their families, and the community as a whole. It marked the beginning of a collective commitment to live with more purpose, love, and unity. At sunrise, the village seemed different. The sun rising on the horizon was received with a newfound appreciation, as if its golden glow were an extension of the flame that had illuminated the church. People started the day with renewed energy, and the air was filled with a sense of hope. Small gestures, such as warm greetings or mutual assistance, became more common, indicating that the candle's message had begun to transform the community from within. Some began to visit the church regularly, even if only to see the candle and remember what had happened that night. Others carried the message into their homes, lighting their own candles as symbols of spiritual commitment. It was as though the original flame had given birth to countless others, spreading its light throughout the village and beyond. Although the event had started in a religious context, its impact transcended all boundaries. The message of hope and renewal resonated even with those who did not consider themselves religious. The candle's light became a reminder that there is something universally human in the search for meaning, connection, and a better future. This realization fostered a sense of unity that the village had not experienced in decades. Among the villagers, stories began to circulate about how that night had changed their lives. A family on the verge of leaving the village decided to stay, inspired by the newfound sense of purpose they had discovered. A young woman, previously consumed by anxiety about the future, found the courage to pursue a dream she had abandoned. An elderly man who had lived in isolation for years was seen laughing and chatting with his neighbors. Each story was a reflection of the transformation the light had brought about. Meanwhile, the candle continued to burn. Even as days passed, no one dared to extinguish it or move it from its place. It was a living testimony, a tangible connection to what had happened on that miraculous night. For everyone, it was a constant reminder that no matter how difficult times may be, the light will always find a way to shine. And perhaps that was the most important message of all. Hope is indestructible. The village, once seemingly destined for obscurity, began to rebuild itself, not just physically, but spiritually. The candle's flame had ignited something deeper, something that could not be extinguished. It was the beginning of a new era for the community, an era marked by faith, unity, and the certainty that there is always a greater purpose, even in the darkest moments. Ultimately, the abandoned church ceased to be a symbol of tragedy and became a place of gathering, renewal, and hope. The sound of the bell, silent for years, rang out once more, marking a new chapter in the village's story. The candle continued to burn, a light that would never fade, illuminating not only the church, but also the hearts of all who believed in its meaning. The abandoned church that was reborn in light on that Christmas night became an eternal testimony that hope can emerge even in the darkest moments. The flame of that candle, which never went out, was more than a miraculous event. It was a living message of faith, unity, and resilience. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of this story is how it challenges us to reflect on our own lives. Where is the light we keep alive within us? How can we reignite the flames of hope, even when everything around us seems lost? That night changed an entire village, but the transformation it brought was not limited to the people who were present. It also invites us, the spectators of this story, to seek our own light, to rediscover the flame that can guide us through life's challenges. Each of us has the capacity to carry this light, to spread it to those around us, and to make a difference in a world that often seems shrouded in darkness. This story also reminds us that miracles can happen in the most unexpected places, but our hearts must be open to recognize them. Just as the villagers found renewal by following the candle's light, perhaps it's time for us to look at our own lives and ask ourselves, where do we need light? Which areas of our lives need rebirth, a miracle, or a spark to reignite our faith and purpose? If you feel touched by this message and wish to explore more deeply how to reignite your own light, I invite you to discover the e-book Light in the Darkness, Finding Hope at Christmas. This resource is more than a read. It's a practical and inspiring guide that combines biblical reflections with simple exercises to strengthen your faith and help you overcome fear, uncertainty, and anxiety. It was created for moments like this, when we feel the need for guidance to bring us back to the path of hope and inner peace. Many people have already shared stories of how the ebook transformed their lives, helping them find purpose and confidence amid challenges. One reader commented, "I was at my lowest point, not knowing where to turn until I read Light in the Darkness. It was like finding my own lit candle, guiding me back to God." If you feel that you need something like this ebook could be the perfect next step in your journey. If this story brought value to you, don't forget to like this video and share it with friends and family who might benefit from this message of hope. Also, I'd love to hear from you. What is the light you keep alive in your life? What do you do to overcome moments of darkness? Write in the comments. Your story might inspire others who are also searching for hope. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue receiving inspiring stories like this. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any content. And if possible, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Finally, check out the video appearing on your screen now. It continues this conversation about strengthening faith and finding purpose during challenging times. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, even in the darkest moments, there is a light that never goes out.